As you can see, I'm wearing my Yankee gear. And you might ask, why am I doing that? Well, it was available. As a matter of fact, my dog has been using. This is a wool remake, right, of the Joe DiMaggio jersey that he would have worn during the centennial. Um, as a kid growing up, a little bit before we had the Blue Jays, I believe, my father used to talk about Joe DiMaggio, and he used to talk about a lot of American baseball players because we did not have Canadian major league teams so much. I mean, we did have the Expos, and then we had the Blue Jays after a while. But he was a huge fan, and Babe Ruth, even up here in Canada, Babe Ruth was an absolute legend. Here was a guy who started out as a pitcher. It turned out he could hit really well. They built a stadium around his hitting prowess, and they had a lot of success. And my kind of point about this is that there are a lot of people in the United States that, let's face it, are absolute morons who don't understand that in places like Canada, specifically Canada, but you'll actually see throughout Latin America as well, American culture had a huge influence on people. Huge influence, and positive many times, uh, Speaking of Latin America, look at all of the tremendous baseball players coming from Latin America. And I hope Latin America is the correct term. I'm not so up to date on my political correctness. As a matter of fact, it's never been one of those things that I've cared about, right? But my point is that we've had that. And for me specifically, it was a bit different than my dad. But now I look back at it and I'm like, well, Dad was right, Damn, these baseball players, these guys were legends. But for me growing up, it was about Motown, Chuck Berry, you know. Who else can I really think of, in the United States? Obviously Bo Diddley, the whole chess thing, the whole Motown thing, you know. Not so much Elvis Presley, but that's just a personal taste thing. But Carl Perkins, you know, Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps, right? All of this great stuff coming from the United States. And for me, growing up, it was like this is the melding of all these cultures together. We keep hearing about the melting pot of the United States and how great it is. And that was, so very effective. But we can talk about the melting pot and we can go on about how great that is and all of this stuff happened. But there is a reality underneath that. Motown could not or would not, in the very early days, put pictures of their black artists on the front of the album because then it would not be placed in record stores in a prominent area. Now, this I know from visiting the Motown Museum, okay? And they were talking about that. And I always thought it was very interesting. If you look at the very first Mary Wells record, how, like, there's a figure there, but you don't know who exactly it is. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. And then you start to find out. You have Tamla Motown Special #1, which is one of the classic albums of American music, which doesn't have any pictures on the front, just a big black circle, and, list of songs. Tremendous, tremendous stuff. America has had this huge influence across the world, right? And I want to talk, I just wanted to say before I get into the shit that I'm going to get into, that it's been very positive and very loved. I mean, just look at the Beatles, for example. The Beatles don't exist without American rock and roll. And, on their second album, they did 3 Motown covers, And I think they did a Chuck Berry cover on that second album as well, right? And then they have all these covers on the first album. And it's really tremendous. It's a tremendous impact. But sometimes you have to say, oh my, how the mighty have fallen. The United States on the world stage is an absolute disgrace at this point in time. You know? And I don't want to dive into all of it, but let's focus just very quickly on economics, you know, and world politics, right? The United States is exceptionally weak. Exceptionally weak. Why? Well, Donald Trump is absolutely a weak leader. Okay? He will not stand up to Putin. He does not have the ability. He changes his mind all the time and he says, oh, there's going to be some tough stuff coming out. There's going to be some tough stuff coming out. It never comes out. He simply cannot do it. He's too weak. Why? Because he respects Putin, because he only respects power. Now, Putin has very little power. Okay? People act like his army is going to invade Europe. Now, they are on the war front, you know, they are investing in more artillery, but absolutely, Putin could easily be fucking destroyed. And if the United States had a spine at all, if he walked into, as he's trying to, you know, we're starting to see drones flying into Poland, for example. If he tried to walk into Poland, he would be absolutely fucked. And it would be very easy to absolutely destroy Russia. No one wants to do that because we're talking about nuclear powers, right? But the fact is that the United States, with Trump in charge, they are absolutely weak. But I want to go into the domestic realm of the United States. It is an absolute disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace. The United States has been moving ahead for so long after the civil rights movement, and now are, how can you say it? Reverting back. It's a de-evolution. I talked about this before, right? They are devolving. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the left wing in the United States and my complaints about the left wing in general in the Western world. The left wing have not been arguing about economics for a long time. They have been arguing about sociology generally, you know. And what was happening, and I criticized this back at the time, you had these things like, well, we're going to talk about white privilege, you know, which I believe is a very real thing. It's a very real thing. But my complaint about going on and on and on about white privilege was what we want to do is achieve something, right? That's our goal. That should be our goals as human beings. We want to achieve something. And in this case, what we want to achieve? Well, we want to achieve an even playing field for everyone growing up in the United States to have a chance to succeed. My problem with going on and on and on about white privilege is that you can't assume that everyone you're talking to is intelligent. You can't assume that everyone is emotionally mature enough to accept that, yes, as a white person, there are some privileges I have. So instead, and we'll get into the economics of this very, very soon, instead, resentment grows. And then people like Charlie Kirk, who talk about things like white replacement, become, you know, ignorant people start to follow that, right? And what I want to say about this is that the left wing kind of has to understand that in the class system that exists in the United States, there is only a sliver of people who are doing exceptionally well. It looks nice on paper. The United States is doing great. And then you have a whole load of people that are barely scraping by. And you have the middle class, which is shrinking and getting smaller and smaller. So it doesn't make sense to go in there yelling at these white people about white privilege. No, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't achieve anything. And what have we achieved? Well, now, and I'm not blaming the left wing for this, I'll get to this. You've got these people who think that there's this thing going on where they're trying to destroy the white race. You've got people thinking that, equity and inclusion is about, is unfair, right? And it goes on and on and on. A lot of resentment builds, right? And the left on its own, and some of these people being upset isn't going to matter anything. But there's always someone ready to come along to take advantage of that. And that was my complaint, right? You're not attracting people to your cause. You're pushing them away, and you're pushing them into the hands of fascists. And they absolutely are fascists, right? So let's see. What did Donald Trump say? Okay, so here's one thing. So he did this big long thing for Charlie Kirk, right? Here's one thing he said. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. Incredible lack of leadership, you know? I feel sorry for the people in the United States that hear that and, like, I can't believe these people exist, but let's get through this. Hear that and believe what the president is saying. Absolute horseshit. The worst president in the history of the United States. In the modern history of the United States. We have no idea how awful some of the presidents were in the past. I'm sure they were awful. But this is an absolute disgrace. And anyone outside of the United States watching this is horrified. Okay? But what else does he go on to say? Why are people... Well, let's step back a bit. Why are people horrified? I'm just going to give one example. We had Democrats in the Midwest murdered just recently. Do I have a record of what he said about that? You know, he refused. Yeah. Trump says he won't waste time calling Minnesota governor because he talks about how they're crazy and stuff like that. After the murders of Democrat lawmakers. And then says that about Charlie. Charlie's an influencer. These people, in the grand scheme of things, are nothing. They are not lawmakers. They are not policymakers. Okay? I mean, we could go on about so many people who have become famous off of, like, YouTube and streaming and all this crap. I don't care about any of it. You know, it's a money-making business for most of these people. But I think, as I've said before, Charlie also believed in this whole, replacement of white people. He mentioned this a few times, you know. And, we had the Tiki Torch March. Do you remember the Tiki Torch March? The Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us. These people went on a march. These people with fried fucking brains due to QAnon or whatever the fuck went on a march with tiki torches saying the Jews will not replace us. Well, how are the Jews trying to replace you? It's a very small population of Jews on the face of the planet. Let me just say that, first of all. There's not a lot of Jews. But are you saying then the Jews are working with everyone else and saying, please have sex with white people such that they will be replaced and there won't be any white people. Is there a Jewish movement like this? Is this a Jewish movement that I don't know about? And then, of course, now the right wing in the United States is all pro Israeli. Mostly, I have to assume now, because they don't want to look like fascists. But the fact that fascists worked with Nazi Germany and attacked the Jews is really a coincidence and has nothing to do with fascism itself. Fascism is really about corporate government and control and dictatorship. That's the big thing. And it's kind of funny when you look at the United States right now, is that with the tariffs, for example, only corporations are wealthy enough to challenge the tariffs in the form of lobbying. So they will send money and lobbying off in order to make sure that they are exempt from this. Small businesses, which make up, roughly half of the GDP and half of the employment in the United States, are in a much worse position. I know there's at least one lawsuit going after the Trump administration because it is unlawfully putting in tariffs that are destroying their businesses. Will they succeed? We don't know. And even if they do succeed, then okay, that wins, and then we go to the Congress, and the Congress bends over, drops their pants, and does whatever Donald Trump asked for. So will it really matter? It is an era of crony capitalism that has been ushered in the United States. Those with the money will get what they want. Everyone else will suffer. That's exactly what's going on. So to kind of end things off here, the reality is that people like Charlie Kirk are not part of the actual war. And now he's dead, right? And I have no doubt, based on the shit that Donald Trump is saying, that more people are going to die. But the reality is, what is the war in the United States? There is a culture war that is going on that is meaningless bullshit. And then there is a real war that is going on. The real war is to finally stamp down the working class, to put all of the power into oligarchs, and to put an end to the constant frustration from a wealth perspective of having to deal with this stuff. We see it with how the CEOs are acting in the United States now that Donald Trump is president. Look at Meta, one of the shittiest fucking companies I've ever seen, laying off all those people and saying it's due to performance. And then we see Mark Zuckerberg sitting beside Donald Trump like the little sheep fucking loser that he is. I've worked in this industry for a fucking long time. Mark Zuckerberg is a fucking fraud and a fucking loser. He is not the person that you want running high tech, but here he is, and he's good friends and sucking on Donald's dick under the table, I'm quite sure. But anyway, I think I've had too much to drink and I've gone off topic. But that's the reality. It's the oligarchs in the Republican Party versus, are the Democrats much better? Versus the Democrats who invest freely around the world, and they also make a lot of wealth off this. But make no mistakes, Trump is about Trump. Trump is about profiteering off of the presidency. Look at the meme coins. Look at all the fucking money he makes. Look at the tariffs and the fact that you can use meme coins to get audience with Donald Trump. Anyone that believes in him is a fucking idiot and a loser. And I do feel sorry for you. I do. As your country is being laid waste by a fucking grifter. He doesn't care about Charlie Kirk. He doesn't care about the culture wars, but he will use them in order to make sure the oligarchs, and he considers himself one of them now, are taken care of. That's what's going on in the United States. That's the war, and it's a real war. So when you hear the right wing talking about the real war, that's the war they're actually talking about. They're talking about protecting the wealthy and fucking the poor and the middle class. Because they are done dealing with democracy. Because it's a messy fucking game. France, take back the Statue of Liberty. Fuck them. Have a good day.